going to call the August 1st, 2019 Board of Commissioners work session to order. I want to welcome our newest commissioners, Ernie Reynolds for District 5 and Steve Fuller, District 4. Welcome. And I'd like to congratulate Commissioner Chambers. His World Champion Bull Unique's Greatest Son in South America just won the World Angus Forum in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So that's where you went after I got sworn in. Congratulations. All right, we'll start with calling on Probate Judge Edie Haney to discuss a new position for her office, please.
How much time can you give me? I don't need much, just a few minutes.
Oh,
but
go ahead.
I do want to take a few minutes. I've got three new one returning and two new. And I do want to say a few things about the probate court because I don't get to talk to the commissioners very often. And I do want to say Judge Kaysen retired after 22 years with the probate court, but when she retired, there are two tiers of probate courts by statute. So if your population is under 95,000, then you are allowed to have a lay judge. Judge Kaysen was a lay judge, and our county reached population threshold during her term. But because she was a sitting judge, as long as she continued on the bench, then she was grandfathered in and she was allowed to continue to hold that position. And we were fortunate to have her for as long as we did have her. But when Judge Kaysen retired, then then our court became what's called an Article 6 probate court. And the judge of the probate court is now required to have the same qualifications that a superior court judge has. And so the judge must be at least 30 or 35 years of age, be a member of the bar in good standing, have practiced law for at least 7 years, and so that judge then has expanded jurisdiction. And so the probate court can now have jury trials. We've never been able to have jury trials before. There are a number of types of cases that would have to have gone to state or superior court that now can be heard in the probate court. So it takes some of the burden off state and superior court because those can now be heard in probate court. And also, appeals from our court now go straight to the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals. Prior to being an Article 6 court, those appeals would go to our superior court, and you started over from scratch. So that also takes some burden off the superior court. So I do say that to say, I know you have a lot of departments to be familiar with. There's a lot of things to know. But again, I don't get to speak to all my commissioners very often, and I think that's something to know that we now have an Article 6 probate court, which means you also have to have an Article 6 probate judge. So I've provided information. One of the things I would say in coming into my position is I come in as an interim, so I'm filling the term of Judge Kaysen. She retired in the middle of her term, but we will be having an election for the probate judge. Qualification will be in March 2020, and in the November election, we'll elect a new probate judge. So at that point, we'll be looking for qualified candidates to serve in this position. And I think one of the things that the commission needs to look at is that the probate judge's salary has not been adjusted for an Article 6 judge. And prior to officer, and I've talked about that with the commission, which means there is a base salary set, but it is authorized to have a supplement. The county is authorized to give a supplement for that position. It's not required, but I will say it is a different standard, a different requirement, different qualifications for an Article 6 judge, much different than it is for a lay judge. And I will say, there was one other thing, the attorney who serves as probate judge must also serve full-time. And so while a lay judge has the option to have other employment, to sit as a mediator, to practice law, those types of things, an Article 6 judge does not. They're prohibited from having any other employment. So that's one thing to note as well. And I have provided to the commission, I do have copies for our new commissioners, basically a summary of where the salary position is now. I will say the salary is based on longevity, so Judge Kaysen's salary was much more comparable to other judges in our county. whereas the new position starts over from square one, and the only differentiation, if there's not a supplement from the county, is longevity. So it doesn't take into account anything for experience coming into the job. Again, the commission has that option. I've provided that information, and I'll be glad to provide it to our new commissioners. Okay, so that's that. The other thing I did want to talk about today was in my budget request, and I have been through the budget process. Please forgive me. This is my first time, so I'm still learning the ropes, and I came in right smack in the middle, it feels like, of budget process. So I understood Judge Kaysen, when I was training for her position and she was talking with me, she said, you're about to do budget process and you need another half-time person. And having been in the office, having been in the office now for about 6 months, I need another half-time person. And I understood, I included in my first budget request that I submitted for a half-time person. Alicia and I met, and Alicia and I talked about there are the funds in the probate court allocation. So the funds are available for a half-time person. And so I took that request out of my budget request when I came to see the commissioners. But in Alicia and I going through it and talking to Ms. Ann, I came to understand that whether the funds are actually in my budget or not, that I can afford it under my budget, I still have to have the head count approved. And so I'm go back to my original budget request and say, my funds are available for that, as I understand, but I need to have the head count of another half person approved. So I'm here today to say, okay, I'd like to have that put back into my budget, the request for half a person. So, does anyone have questions for me? Ms. Ann and Ms. Alicia, am I saying that correctly as far as you can tell? Okay.
Madam Chair, I've got some questions for staff, but I don't know if this is the time to ask. Or...
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. On the, and I've gotten to know Miss Edie here as well over the past couple of months, and enjoyed speaking with you and getting to learn a little bit more about your department. I guess one of the questions I had for Ms. Searcy, when we first got the information about the work session, there was something there, I think, about temporary labor to part-time position, and then I went back in and looked again, and it says adding a permanent part-time position, and I don't know if that's a work in progress or if something changed regarding what you're discussing, or
again, it was in my original budget request, but we thought it was already funded, and so I took it out. I took the request out because I thought it was already in the budget, but the head count was not. So.
Well, I think the difference is we just wanted to make a clarification in that this was a permanent part-time person. It wasn't a temporary part-time person. And I think there may have been some confusion about that. So we reworded it to be specific that it was a full-time, not a full-time, but a permanent part-time person. It wasn't somebody that was just going to work for a season and then not come back. It's somebody that will be part-time in the probate court for years to come.
So how did we, I guess I'm still not following, I'm sorry if that's too loud, how does she have the funding in the budget? You're saying that it's technically the money is sitting in her budget line?
If we took the budget from last year and we took out the amount for her salary, then there's still enough money in the budget to fund the positions that she's asking for. So, let me see. I mean, I can go over here and look at it. But
so you weren't fully staffed last year? Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding. Well, I didn't have the head count, though, is my understanding.
I'm not exactly sure what was included in the budget last year because I didn't put last year's budget together. But if I take last year's budget and I take the request that she asked for, then there's funding in there to cover another part-time person.
Okay, I'm still just not, it's nothing against Judge Haney, I'm just not following how there's additional money in the budget. I'm not following how there's money already there.
Okay, well, I think the best thing to do is to sit down with you and show you where we were on last year's budget. I mean, I can, hang on just a minute. Let me just go over here.
I mean, I'm just not aware of any other department head that comes before us and says, I'd like to add a position, but I've already got the money in my line item. I just don't follow that.
And I don't know if Judge Kaysen had a part-time. I know she had done some work with Three Rivers and some others that she had some temporary part-time, and I think that may be what it is, that she had some temporary part-time from various places.
Now, one of the things I remember, and this is before I was sworn in, but I was sitting out there when I was running for office, and I remember Judge Kaysen coming before this board, Madam Chair, and I think she was asking for a position that was going to be reimbursed. Does that have anything?
I don't think so.
That may have been mental health.
I think that was Jody
Something
Goodman, who's our
separate,
mental
okay.
health advocate.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm looking at the sheet that says budget appropriation fiscal year 2019-2020 judicial. And behind that, there's a probate budget, okay? So it shows what the budget for probate was for fiscal year 18, fiscal year 19, and fiscal year 20. So last year, fiscal year 19, there was $525 in the budget for probate court. This year, there's $448,625. Of that, in regular salaries, last year you had $236,000. You had temporary of $66,000. You had this year you have $220,000, and you have temporary labor of $66,000. So if you take the head count that Judge Haney has right now, and you add a half-time person to it, if you total up $220,000 and $66,000, there's enough dollars there to cover what she's asking for in salaries.
Okay. I don't doubt that Judge Haney needs the position. I'm just trying to follow the money. And you're explaining. I think we would just have to speak afterwards, because I don't know that I'm still fully following it.
Okay. Well, I can show you the spreadsheet of the wages, and maybe that would be more clear on.
And Ms. Lee, as far as from an HR perspective with the head count, you're in agreement about the head count or whatever is being discussed?
The budget for probate is 4 part-time and 5 full-time. 2 of those positions are funded by grant. So there are reimbursements that are coming in for 2 positions.
And those positions are Rita Carroll and Jody Goodman. Mm-hmm.
So when we give the budget, our part of the budget process is giving the people that are fully employed and part-time at the time, it's a snapshot that we give, and we give those salaries that we know what they are at that particular time. So I'm not sure where the grant money is coming back in, but 2 of those positions are funded by grant.
And you have in the budget where they're coming back in. Alicia, we looked at
Yeah, the
those.
grant money's coming back into the line item that it's paid out of.
So the grant is washing it
That's correct.
out?
That's correct.
Okay. Maybe we can just talk and you can clarify later.
Okay.
It's just, I'm not really, I don't know how there's extra money there. That's all I'm saying. So,
Well, there was money that wasn't used last year, in last year's budget. So when you look at the total expended compared to the amount in the budget, there wasn't as much expended as there was in the budget. Now, why there was more in last year's budget, I don't know, because I didn't put that budget together. But based on the head count report that I've got for this year and the extrapolation of the wages, then that fits into the numbers that are on this year's budget.
okay.
What is this dollar amount?
Thank you.
I want to say 22,000. We looked at it.
What are you planning on paying?
$12 an hour.
$12 an hour.
That's what we looked at.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions for Judge Haney? Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to item 2, the review and discussion of items for our meeting next Tuesday. And we'll start at the financial session, and Alicia's going to go over our proposed budget and budget resolutions.
We have met earlier on the budget, and we went over a proposed budget back in the April meeting. Everyone took a great deal of time, all the commissioners that were remaining took a lot of time to review the budget, and I appreciate your time and effort in looking over everything. I think we spent a tremendous amount of time going through it, but I think it was very informative for all of us, and we learned a lot of things by stepping through each part of the budget as we did. So what I've done is I've made a few changes to the budget, and I would like to talk about those changes first, and then we can get as in-depth as anybody wants to in the budget process, or we can leave it at where we are right now. Chairman Morgan asked me to look at the budget and see if there was a possible way for us to put the raises into effect for all of the employees at the same time. And so we took a look at everything and calculated the amount of putting the raises in as soon as we could. And so we found that if we gave all the raises on August the 2nd, that the not putting public safety in for a month actually saved enough to fund the additional raises at 2% for the other employees. So in this budget, we have built the 5% raises in to go on August the 2nd. We've included the animal control officers in the public safety realm, and they're getting the 5%. And then the firefighters will get the $1 an hour that we discussed, and the other employees will get the 2% on August the 2nd, as proposed in the package that you got today. Additionally, I added the debt service principal and interest for the DFAX building, and there was some question about whether that would be included in the general fund or not, but I've had some pretty extensive discussion with our auditors, and we agreed that that's the best place to put it because we have the income from the DFAX coming back into the general fund. We would have had to change that if we would have changed the debt service, so we agreed to do that, so that was added to the general fund. Now, as far as revenue, I adjusted property tax slightly, $2,000, to help offset some of the cost of that debt service. I looked at the local option sales tax actual revenue that we've realized so far this year, and I felt like we could increase that $200,000. Parks, we increased $35,000, and that's also adjusted for FY19 actuals. And then I adjusted increased interest for $15,600, also in line with fiscal year 2019 actual revenues. So in the I've got a loss of words here. The budget document, the ordinance, we have lined out there one part-time person for IT, one full-time person for the solicitor's office, a part-time person for probate court, and moving a part-time person in the ag ed to a full-time person and all of the funding for that's included in the budget. Those are the biggest changes that we've made since April. Those are the changes. The people and the positions are not changes. Those were in the April budget. The changes that I outlined are the changes that have been made since the April budget, which is what we reviewed during the April meeting. If you would like more detail on anything in the budget, I'll be glad to go over that. I just didn't feel like it. If we want to take the time to do that, I'll be glad to do it. But if we don't want to take the time, I don't want to waste everybody's time. So if anybody would like more, let me know.
Madam Chair, can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
So, as you know, during the campaign, my big thing was benchmarking and performance indicators. I'm convinced, I think Carroll County runs fairly lean, but I don't see any information corresponding with the budget where I can get a feel as to how we are actually performing. There's no benchmark. For example, let's just take, I see Renee, whatever back there, let's just say that typically the industry standard is to have one staff person for every 10,000 parcels of property. I don't know if, I'm sure we're running fine, but I don't know if, we're at that level, if we're at one staff person for 39,000 parcels of property. So I don't have any benchmarking information to go by in the budget. That's one thing I'd like to work on developing for the county. These raises, is it, and this may be getting into too much detail, but the 5% and 4%, I mean, I'm fine with that. I know our public servants need raises and haven't had that for a long time. But what I'm wondering is there any differentiation among employees, like if we have people who need to show significant improvement versus those who are doing an outstanding job, does everybody get 5% or do some of them get 2% and some of them get 8%? Do we have that flexibility? And is there a performance evaluation system in place so that we can document that flexibility?
Do you want to speak on that, Ann, or do you want me to talk about what we talked about at the retreat? I'll let Ann speak on that. There is some plan to do that, and I think she's has a better.
Yeah, I mean, historically, again, working at state auditor's office and overseeing quite a few staff, there were some people who performed very well, most people, of course, in the bell curve, and then some that needed improvement. And I always like the flexibility to give my outstanding performers a good raise.
Correct. You and I talked a little bit about this when we've met this week, but in our works, we have a work retreat in February of this year. And we used to do performance evaluations, and the sheriff's office actually still is doing evaluations. But when this raise was first talked about, I think it was across the board, they decided to give the sheriff's department, in fact, the sheriff came in with a 5-year long-term strategy plan 2 years ago. So we are actually in the 3rd year. So at the retreat, we talked about the increases, and at that time, I handed out a performance evaluation that we were going to begin this year. My goal was that everyone would complete it by October. When Chairman Smith resigned in March, I kind of put it on hold, did not know what was going to take place, and wanted to come back and revisit it when the new chairman came into office. So the plan is to start that up before the end of the year. I probably will be sending that evaluation form back out to the new district commissioners. I think Michelle saw it back in February. It's very simple. We just need to get it started. Performance evaluation is not all about money. is about telling an employee whether they are doing a good job or not. So we are going to implement that this year. Hopefully we can come into the new year. But these raises were talked about just going ahead and doing it before the performance evaluation. So I'm hoping that beginning the new year, we will get on the routine of evaluations, and maybe this time next year, the raise can be looked at differently.
Okay.
Is that kind of answer?
A lot of that too is dependent on the department heads, because
Oh, yeah.
Joe's my buddy and I might give him an excellent, and I think a
Oh,
lot
sure.
of that happens.
Oh, there has to be a hierarchy of supervision over that, for sure, yes. But if I was an outstanding employee, I mean, and I had some who worked for me for sure, and everybody got 3%, I would lose them if I didn't give them more. So I'd hate for us to continue to lose great employees just because we can't give them more than what is a standard amount. So while, yes, the feedback from supervisor to employee is crucial, and you should have great feedback constantly, and it shouldn't be just at evaluation time, and it should be throughout the year. I'm a great proponent of that. I think when it comes raise time, if there's been somebody there and they've been busting themselves to promote goodness and perform well, and there might be another employee who isn't even doing what they should do, not saying there are any of those, but typically there are, then I would like the flexibility as a supervisor to give a little more to those who are really excellent performers. If not, I think we're going to lose those excellent performers.
Madam Chair, I had some questions as well. Ms. Searcy, when you went over the information that's from the new chairman's proposed budget, I guess that's what you're saying you were presenting. Stuff like such as the law clerk for the Superior Court, is that stuff still left in there that we went over and had a consensus? Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Okay, the only reason I asked is like you had in there IT that we had already had a consensus about, plus we had the consensus about the Superior Court law clerk position, so I just didn't understand if you were listing positions only. So everything else that we went over is in here. Judge Palmer, didn't we have something in there for him
That's
as well?
correct.
So all that has remained?
That's correct.
The only thing, Clint, that we
Okay.
took out was currently we will not be filling the operations manager position, which was Gerald's,
Yes, ma'am.
and we will be filling the communications position that we all had talked about at the February meeting. So that's the only thing. Otherwise, nothing else was taken out. Just
Okay.
those will not be filled.
Okay, and I've got a couple of comments about that. And Madam Chair, I know that you've come in and tried to do what we're trying to get everyone the raise at the same time, and I certainly can appreciate that. I think my concern is, while there was some talk, I think I went to all the debates. There were 6 or 7 or 8 debates during this last campaign cycle. While some people voiced that they didn't want to see a marketing position, the overwhelming majority basically stated that they wanted to see the county doing a better job of communicating. And I'm certainly not directing that to any one person, but someone that's been in the marketing field for 18 years, I can appreciate what it's like that we need to have someone that has the skill set to be able to do that. I think one of the things when I was working with Chairman Smith before he left on a couple of projects that I had volunteered my time with is that we were paying someone to keep up our social media, and I don't remember what that cost was. I want to say it was $1,600 a month. I can't remember, but I would like to see that completely pulled out of the budget. That is a complete waste, and I won't go into details, but that person has done absolutely nothing for the county. It's someone that understands marketing. I feel like the staff have had to put a lot of time in, and they didn't do some things that they needed to do. I don't think that money is being well spent.
I'm not familiar with anyone currently under contract for that.
Well, there is. I was told there was. It may not be a contract, but we're spending money. The other thing, one of the other budget items that I had was the $38,000 and some odd change that was talked about for the pictometry aerial maps that was with the tax assessor's office. I know that we discussed that with Miss Renee Palmer and Mr. Fulford at one time with the 4 commissioners that were left in a budget meeting. And I had done some more research with that topic as well. And since then, I had gone to an ACCG training course, and I had spoken with a gentleman there who had worked for Governor Roy Barnes before. He had been a tax assessor before. And I basically had put this question before him. I said, is this something that you think we would bring in enough revenue over the top of what we're spending? And his response was, absolutely. If you spend this $38,000 for the next 3 years, you will realize more than $38,000 in revenue in a county your size. It's impossible if you go too many years in between having these pictometry aerial photos done. You simply, staff on the ground simply cannot keep up with everyone's not being honest in what they need to report. So I'm only going off what he told us, and I think as a board, we're always looking at ways to maximize revenue. So that's something I would like the board to consider. Yes, it's $38,000, but if we feel confident that the revenue can be seen as well, I mean, that's something that could wash itself out and not really be seen as an expense, if that makes sense. And Ms. Cersei, I know you and I briefly discussed that before, and that was something you were discussing. Maybe the revenue could be adjusted. Let's see what else.
Well, I mean, if we're going to spend more money, then we've either got to cut expenses from somewhere or we've got to add revenue. And I think that's more in the tax assessor, tax commissioner realm as far as, since it will affect property tax, if they feel like they can guarantee that the revenue would increase, then we could consider that.
Well, I don't think anything's a guarantee. I mean, we've got a $53 million budget that we can't guarantee anybody's going to go out tomorrow and spend money and we're going to collect SPLOST dollars off of sales tax either. But I'm just saying, don't take my word for it. I think it's something we can look into. And if, at the end of the day, if it's a revenue neutral or it makes us revenue, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So.
I just don't know enough about the process to
Yes, ma'am.
make a good decision.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that would be something for next year's budget at this point. When you and I talked about it, we would have to cut $38,000 from another line, or we'd have to postpone possibly when the employees would be getting their raises. So I think it's something that goes on the wish list. You know, we have this document when all the department heads turn things in. There's some things on this list we are not funding this year, and you can read that we're not funding it. So I think that could be something that gets on the list. But as far as putting it on for Tuesday night, the money's got to come out of another line item.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I don't know that I would agree with that. I understand that we would have to pay the money up front, but the idea is, yes, we would have to physically pay it, but it doesn't mean you have to cut something else. The whole point is you would project the revenue to come in and wash out the expense. So, yes, we would have to pay it, but it does not mean, like you stated, we have to cut a line item. That's not correct. Is that correct, Ms. Cersei? If we believe that the revenue would come in, you don't have to go and cut a line item. You just have to assure that we can pay for it and that we assume that it's going to come in and wash that out, correct, in the revenue?
If we want to add the revenue, then we can add the expense and our budget continues to be balanced. If we don't want to add the revenue, then we've got to cut an expense.
Right. And I don't know
to
if I
add
feel
an expense.
comfortable with the short notice of research on this.
No,
Okay.
we don't. And we did discuss it at great length, and I think we need to wait on it.
The public works, if we're talking about public safety, I feel like public works is a public safety. If we're going to add in the animal control, I mean, I think animal control probably does a fine job, but if public works is called at 2 o'clock in the morning to go out and cut a tree limb out so our first responders can get through a road, or if they're paving lines on the road, or doing things that are of public safety nature, I don't know that I would choose to put the,
Well, that's from previous, I don't want to use the word charter or ordinances, but it's already in the county, I don't know the word I'm looking for, the chart of accounts, that animal control is already in there. we just had missed it when they were doing the numbers. So it wasn't anything I particularly added and made them automatically public safety. They were already in the chart of accounts. So if we want to add public works, that could be something else we add at a future work session to discuss to change that. But it's currently already been designated. They were not added, it was just a correction.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I guess during the campaign, one of the things that came up was ambulance service, and I just wanted to make sure that we as a full commission were okay with the extent or volume of ambulances and ambulance service, because when ambulances are taken up with transport versus true emergency calls, it seems to be a significant problem from what I heard. And I didn't know if this budget reflected any revision or change or redo to ensure our citizens that there was proper response time and that kind of thing from an ambulance service when they could be busy going to Cobb County to transport somebody. But I just wanted to make sure of that.
We do have a contract with them, and it might be such short notice for you, but it might be a good idea to sit down with West Georgia Ambulance and go over what they say they'll provide for the county.
I think they provide 6, we added an ambulance last year, we have 6. But what happens is sometimes they pull our ambulances to do these transports instead of leaving them in the county to do what we're paying them to do.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It is, yeah. Can I make a comment on?
Sure.
Okay, so in the parks area, as you know, I'm a proponent of our parks. I think we have great parks, and there's a couple in my area, particularly McIntosh, that I'd like to see even utilized more. There are 2 things I'm wondering about. One is if there's sufficient accountability over the fees collected, and I don't know the total amount of fees, but I imagine there's enough to at least have a system of at least a numbered receipts or something, where because from my experience, people drive in there, give them their $5 or $10, whatever, and get no receipts. And I'd like to see just a little accountability over those fees, be that just from a numbered receipt system that is audited once a year, so that we balance the fees collected with the fees put in the bucket for the county, so that we're not possibly losing money. I'm not talking about theft even, I'm just talking about not losing track of the money. So,
There is numbered receipts at Tanner and at Little Tallapoosa.
well, there's not at McIntosh, I know
That's
that.
correct,
So,
and we're working on that.
okay, good. The other thing that I think I've visited McIntosh probably once a week during about a 15-year period when our children were growing up and riding horses there and so on. But one thing that bothered me was that I, as a Carroll County citizen, am paying the same amount as Coweta County, Douglas County people who come. That kind of doesn't sit well with me. But the other thing is, I'd like to see no fees charged to our Carroll County senior citizens. I don't know if we can do that or not. It may be a wrong thing to bring that up, but I just think our senior citizens, if they want to have a nice quiet time at McIntosh, they ought to go there and not have to pay. But that's just something I've been springing to you out of the blue, but it's just been on my mind. It doesn't seem like it would be that much revenue lost, particularly if we tighten up on receipts and that kind of thing.
Ms. Cersei, when we had met before, and I apologize if you've told me this, I don't know that we got back together, but I think there was an $80,000 addition error or something for the fire department. Were you able to, I think you were over projecting what the additional cost for FY20 would be. I think it was off by $80,000. Was just wondering if that.
It's been a while since I've looked at it, so I
Okay.
can't say off the top of my head. I will review it, though.
Okay, I can get with you after. I was just curious if it was a wash or if it generated, you know what I'm saying, additional money that you were able to use.
Right.
Okay.
Any other further questions for Alicia?
I would just make one final comment on the aerial pictography. That is not so much a wish list. I think they were audited and they were dinged with that on their audit. So I would just, if we don't get it, we don't get it this year. But I just think that we need to understand that they've been dinged a few years in a row from the auditors that hadn't been done. So we just need to keep that in mind as a board. Thank you.
And as a last comment, I would say, yeah, in both Vicky's area and Renee's area, in the future, automation seems like a good thing, and particularly if we can automate and have that offset personal services costs and increase our efficiency and decrease waiting lines and that kind of thing, it seems to be a good thing.
Okay, so next on the list, Vince is not here this afternoon, but he will be at the meeting on Tuesday. District 6 Commissioner Chambers is going to present item 8.2, the flooring for the basketball, volleyball gymnasium. This item was part of an original plan in the building of the gymnastics facility and then to renovate the old gymnasium to be used for basketball and volleyball.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chairman. Not exactly sure how I got to do this. I guess just kind of because I was sitting downstairs when all this happened. But I'm going to pass down 3 pictures. They're photocopies, but I think they will show kind of what Vince is after. Just kind of from a 30,000-foot view, as you all know, until we are coming to the finish line Monday, so to speak, on our state-of-the-art gymnastics facility. And just in case you all didn't see the emails or whatever, we are going to have that grand opening at 2 on Monday, so I hope everybody can attend. But the basketball and volleyball courts, part of the original recreation department, had previously been used for the gymnastics facility. That equipment and mats, so forth and so on, has now been moved into the new facility. But with the evacuation, if you will, of that, much of that equipment was bolted to the floor with either lag screws or red heads. That is no longer there, so now it's time to renovate that floor. What is being proposed, and Vince brought me this, are these snap together squares. And I'm going to read you just a little bit what he's got here, and then certainly ask you to quiz him more on Tuesday. But basically what he's saying is, with the completion of the gymnastics facility, the basketball, volleyball facility, gym flooring will need to be renovated because all that gymnastics equipment was bolted to the floor there. So this space needs to be renovated so it can be utilized as it was originally designed. The gymnastics equipment has been occupying one full area of that basketball court basketball and volleyball court since 2008. That is, as I said, been bolted to the floor. The current flooring is a poured rubber-based floor. You can see in the pictures the flooring has started to crack in many locations, as well as I mentioned, the bolts and lag screws and red heads that were used holding that down. Snap Sports Maple Revolution, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is a suspended one-piece flooring system. This comes in 12 by 12 squares. It has a 16-year product warranty. What makes it great, and I understand this even though I don't know anything about flooring, is if for something happened on one of these squares or 2 of these squares and they broke, you snap it up and put a new one in instead of having to renovate the whole floor. And no, I'm not a salesman for this company. I'm just reading what's written here. So, but anyway, there are the quotes on here. One thing to keep in mind is that not every flooring company can offer this because it is a specialized flooring. Vince says that he has talked with multiple other rec departments, and this is not only the best choice as he sees it, speaking from their experience, but it's also the cheapest bid. So I'm going to pass this down. You all look at it. Maybe it means more to you all than it does me. because I see what he's getting at. I see its usefulness in terms of if something happened to 1 square, 2 squares, whatever, it's a lot cheaper to pop one up and pop another one back in than it is to have to do major renovations. So encourage you to get with Vince and ask him more questions on this Tuesday night. But he did ask me to present that to the board on his behalf. I will tell you the reason he's not here, many of you know his mom is having some issues, and so he and his family are trying to help her deal with those, otherwise he would be here. So, thank you, ma'am.
Y'all have any questions?
I hope you don't, because I've told you 100% of what I know, so.
I was just about to say, if you have any questions, we can send an email to Vince, or you can leave them here, and we'll make sure they get answered and then repeated on Tuesday afternoon. So,
I have a question. The floor that's there now, you said it's a rubber floor?
That's my understanding, yes, sir, is a poured rubber-based floor is what his notations say.
Well, I can tell you this much, I used to coach, and just about every gymnasium in the state at the high schools, they removed those rubber floors. They're unsafe. So, if it has a rubber floor on it, then, yeah, I agree, something needs to be done with it.
I've got a question and/or comment. So I play basketball a lot. It's my favorite sport. But one of the things from just I guess a frugality standpoint is I wonder, after we replace the flooring, how much is that, and this isn't a question for you, Jordan.
I was fixing to say,
Yeah.
you're just making a general statement, because
Right.
you're asking the wrong fellow.
Right, but how much is that basketball gym going to be used? It kind of irks me that in the city and in the county, we have enormous facilities with terrific basketball facilities, and every time I go in them, they're vacant. And they're sitting there using taxpayers' money, running the lights, and not benefiting the citizens one iota. And that isn't right. I just don't like that. So I'd hate for us to spend nearly $100,000 replacing a floor and not have anybody be able to play there in the first place. I want to see, if we're going to have a gym, or if we're going to spend $100,000 to put in a different floor, one question I have is, why did we tear it up in the beginning to put gymnastics there? But that's the second point. But once we do replace the floor, I think we should make sure that the citizens can benefit from the facility.
Ernie, it's my understanding we currently are renting several facilities in order to run the basketball program out of the county rec. So I'd like to ask you exactly which facilities are empty, because the county only owns the one current facility that's being used. There's like one court for basketball, and then the rest is for gymnastics. So we want to go back and put the basketball back in. So I'm not sure what facility you're referring to that is not being used by the county.
Well, before the gymnastics equipment was put there, I went there 20 times, and nobody was ever playing. It was closed down. If I wanted to play, I couldn't. And if I wanted at 7 o'clock at night to bring 5, 6 folks there, or 10 folks there to play basketball, I couldn't. And it just irritates me that we have large facilities, millions of dollars of construction costs, a lot of costs in running the lights and whatever, and nobody can play.
So you're just referring to our one gym?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the cities as well, but we're not here for the city. But yes, our gym, I think there are enough people in the county that we should have enough interest that that gym ought to be utilized a good bit.
I will say that the past 4 years that Vince has rented Grace Covenant's gym during basketball season because of the leagues he has.
Well, now
I know that for a fact.
And that's another thing that is kind of irritating to me, because you're right, once the leagues take off, then things are full. But I'm talking about good free play for the citizens that paid to fund the gym in the first place. This isn't about leagues. My opinion is it's a facility there for the taxpayers to use. and it's not just for leagues to use.
Well, I think that it's available if people want to get up and do it, it's there. It's up to them.
Well,
It's open.
when I visited there, like I say, numerous times,
The gym
I couldn't
wasn't
play.
available?
no,
It wasn't available?
No.
It was locked up.
yeah, like, closed, and and if I wanted to come there, like I say, at 8 o'clock and bring folks with me or whatever, no, couldn't do that because it was closed.
Well, I think these are
So-
questions for Vince.
It is,
None of us can
yeah.
really solve it right this moment. You'd have to
It is.
ask him what the purpose,
I
reason
just-
was.
I mean, it's kind of like, if you have a vacation home and we put down $100,000 worth of flooring, but then you never visit the home. So I just want good utilization. Same way with our transport vans. If we're spending tens of thousands of dollars to run them, I'd like some utilization data to say it's worth the money.
We do have that. We got an updated
Yeah.
sheet yesterday, so we'll make sure
Good.
you have that in your packet on Tuesday. Okay, any other question? Well, let's make sure you give your questions to Susan or myself so that we can have Vince be prepared to answer them on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next item on for Tuesday night is 8.3, the solid waste scale replacement. There again, we're sending George to present this, and probably there again, take notes of questions that we'll have to give Charles when he's back.
You're saying send George. I don't know if any of you ever watched the television program Yellowstone, so it kind of like send Rip. But anyway, I can tell a little bit more about this. Early on, during my tenure as interim, Charles came in, and the scales that we use at solid waste to weigh so we can assess the tipping fees broke. The scales are 25 years old. They broke a pin that allowed them, and Clint, you'll understand this having weighed cattle, the pin that actually helped it balance out broke, and it took 2 weeks, and I think with the pin and the cost was right at $5,000. Does that sound in the neighborhood of $5,000 for that one pin? They are 25 years old. Like I said, they are. What we had to do, or what Charles did in the meantime, was just try to give a good estimate of what he thought that those loads weigh to assess the tipping fees, so we could still be generating some income, but it was not an accurate weight, and he will tell you that, no question about it. They just tried to get their best guesstimate, as he put it, but we were still getting some revenue in, but it was not an accurate weight. What he is proposing is to replace those scales using a company. He's got the bids here. You'll see those in your packets. With a company, Atlanta Scales. The good thing that I can tell you about this is essentially what will happen when we do this is the current scales will be undone, taken out. These scales will fit right back in that same footprint. There won't be an additional renovation as far as tearing up any concrete, any paving, anything like that. Basically, it's unplug and plug back in. So there won't be additional costs other than the installation, which is included in here, but it won't be where we're having to tear up anything structural to put in a new set. And he was very adamant that he wanted to be able to do that where there was no more disruption than need be. But again, he just asked me to present this just kind of by virtue of the fact that I was kind of hanging around then. But any questions that you might have, please address them to him. But that's the genesis behind it. So thank you, ma'am.
I was going to say that, I mean, we'd never like to spend money, but I was actually shocked that it was that amount. I figured it would be a lot more.
Yeah.
So.
But you think about just that one pin, not what it cost us in lost revenue, even though they were doing their best guesstimate, as he puts it. Just that one pin, there's 4 pins. So you're at, you're at $20,000 right there. Just the next time a pin break, the next time that one of the other 3 pins break. So
Thank you, George. I won't ask if there's any further questions for George at this time.
please don't. There again, I've told you 100% about what I know. So
usually at this point of the work session, we pretty much adjourn because we don't go over planning and zoning at a work session. We only do them at the Board of Commissioners meetings. But I've asked Stacy and Janet to go over the procedure with both of y'all being new, and also to remind the rest of us how the procedure should work. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to you two.
just, Janet and I will quickly go over the basic format for the zoning hearing procedures. It's just a little bit different from the business agenda items. And I had a handout at your seats that's just 2 pages. And the first page is kind of the outline for how those are handled, and the second page are those zoning standards that are taken directly from the zoning ordinance. And for the business agenda items, I'll let you find that. But it's, the chair will read the agenda item, and then the presenter will come up, if there is one. And then before there's any discussion, I'll hold off until you You got it. Okay, great. So have the agenda item, have the presenter, and then the chair will ask for a motion and a second, and before there's any discussion on the agenda item. And the person who seconds the motion doesn't necessarily support the motion, but could be doing it just to facilitate the discussion. And then after discussion's ended, the chair will call for a vote, and after the vote, declare the results. So that's a pretty simple process for all of our agenda items except for zoning hearings. And those are governed by our ordinance and the zoning procedures law. And Janet, you can pipe in whenever you want to, but on those, we have to give a fair hearing to the applicant. And so that's what this process is designed to do. And so the chair will read the agenda item, and then Janet will give the staff report and report what her recommendation is. And you'll notice in her staff report, she has the applicable zoning standards listed and her recommendation or her comments on them. And then we'll also tell what Planning Commission recommended. And Planning Commission's recommendation, that's all it is a recommendation, it's not binding on you. Then the chair will read the process for the hearing. The presenter, the applicant will have 10 minutes, and as well as any proponents, anyone in favor, they have 10 minutes to present their application. Then opponents have a 10-minute time, and then there's time for rebuttal, 5 minutes each side. So we try to hold discussion or questions until after their hearing so we don't interrupt their time. And then after the presentations, the chair will ask you, do you have any questions for the staff, Janet, or from the applicant themselves? And so we don't usually engage in discussion with those parties, just mostly asking questions. After you have a chance to ask all the factual questions, then the chair will call for a motion and a second, and then have the discussion amongst yourselves. And if you want to make a motion with conditions, we just need to set those for the record and be very specific. So if there are things the applicant has offered to add as conditions, we just need to make them part of the record, and then have the vote. And then that's basically the format. And Jen, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Just to kind of reiterate what Stacy said about the reason these rules are different than the regular meeting rules is that zoning is covered by the Zoning Procedures Act. So we have specific guidelines about how these sessions should go. So that's why it's a little different and a little more specific.
Does anybody have any questions for Stacy or Janet?
Okay, thank you.
That's your homework for the weekend. Okay, if there's not any further business, I will stand adjourned until next Tuesday at 6 o'clock.